Comrades, I greet you back to Kerbal Space Program. I am Admiral Andre, and this is the 9th episode of my Sandbox series. At least I think it's the 9th episode anyway. I'm sure it is. Just because I tend to get lost in the recording, so I don't realize how much time actually passes. And then when I see it's actually an hour later, so I've split the last 2 episodes into 4, so that's why I just have to keep track exactly of where we are right now, but I'm sure this is episode 9. So let us just quickly review the last 2 things that we really did that still need to get some attention were the launch of Venera 1, which is going to make our first flyby of Eve. And to that goal, I've actually went ahead and forwarded time quite a bit. We're now 166 days since the start of the game. And it doesn't really, of course, have any impact other than the fact that we are closer to our launch window. But I also thought, it's actually nice because it will represent the time that it also took us to continue working on the Vostok. And on that front, I have to say again, despite what I said last time, I couldn't help myself and I did some off-camera work. Not too much, so I didn't mess too much with the Vostok, but I did redesign the R7, and I'll show you now. It's just because, after the recording I always think, I could do so much more, and so I go back in and I continue just because I enjoy it so much, but then obviously there's the issue of not wanting to do all of it like that because then there's no video. So let's get into the VAB. So let me load up what I've done. And that is, if you remember last time we left off basically with the Vostok 1, and I just called this the Vostok 1T, basically just for test so I can work on it a little bit. So there we go. This is now what I think represents a pretty final version, though some more tests will be necessary. So let's actually first start by reviewing the actual capsule itself. So I'll just take the rocket away for a second and we'll look at that a bit later. So there are a few small changes that I made. Actually, we should remove this fairing as well. I'll just put it back in a moment. This part you already know. This is just how it will detach, and this truss structure here will also basically detach, so that's not an issue. But the real Vostok capsule had a series of radiator panels on the bottom of this section here, and so I just replicated that by adding some of the small radiator panels. Now they do overlap a little bit and they create these slightly jagged edges there, but I think that actually looks a little bit like the real thing. And let's just go back to the images and I'll show you why. So we just have the normal Vostok searched here, and if we just go back to this image that we looked at before, if it loads now, there you go. You see on the bottom there it has these radiator panels, and they're not flush with the rest of the structure. They do stick out a little bit. So obviously in real life they could deploy a little bit, but that's not something we can do, so not something to worry about. But at least that gets us a little bit closer to the actual thing again. Here's another image that shows this quite well. So okay, this is now a Lego thing I think, but anyway, it's pretty awesome nonetheless. So let's see, is there something else? I've got some diagrams here. This one doesn't show it very well, but you can still sort of make out that there are radiators down here. Then let me just have a look at one that will show us the antennas again, this one. Now we have the 3 antennas that stick out on the side that the door is on, so we've got that already. Then there are the 4 ones on top, but there are also these 2 sticking out to the side, so I've gone ahead and added those as well. And if we just go back in, I'll show you that. They're all the same, so they're all the deployable ones, but you see they just stick out to the sides there. And actually, if we can maybe make this a bit shorter, that would actually help a little bit. So it looks like this at the moment, but this is of course much longer than the real life equivalent. So maybe I can just move these a little bit further in. But I do like the idea of having deployable antennas. It will help for the re-entry because they will just get ripped off anyway. Unless we just put the 16S on the top as well. Let's just have a look again at that image. So it's basically the scale of the hoop antennas on the bottom. Here is another one that we just looked at. You see, these are the hoops that we use the 16Ss for on the bottom, and there are some more antennas actually. I don't know if that will really be necessary. But then these ones are pretty much, you see, it's almost like an incomplete loop. So I think maybe the 16S could work for that, but then during the re-entry they might actually create a problem. That's the only concern there. And these huge things I'm not going to bother with. That's a bit too much. So let's just go back again. And not all of the images show those big whatever they are on the top there. So that's how it is now. Maybe we'll just do a test with this first, and then we can actually decide whether this is aesthetically pleasing, because that's really what it's about. But then during re-entry it will look like that, which I think is actually a good thing. So we have these non-deployable antennas on the bottom, of course, and that doesn't matter because we jettison them before re-entry. Then the only other thing I changed with the Vostok capsule itself was the thrusters here. Instead of angling them downwards slightly, they now just point straight out, basically 90 degrees. And if we just go back to the center of mass, you can see that that actually makes a huge difference in their performance. Just because before they were basically firing directly into the center of mass, which means that their effect on the craft was very, very limited. In fact, it was just that little bit of deviation from the exact center of mass which allowed them to work at all. But this way they work much better. And I think they still look nice. So all I did was just move these blocks so that they're basically flat. I didn't really mess with the nozzles there, although I think maybe I did. I just moved them a bit down, and just so they don't stick out so much. But I think I really like the way that this turned out. So that's it. That's the sum of all that I did with this. I just also, let me think. I might have, yes, but that's not really a structural change. But the decoupler in there with the capsule, I just reduced that to a very minimal force again, so that the capsule doesn't get fired off. I'm still not sure if the tanks here are actually going to be in the way. If we have a close look, we can see they do slightly still clip into the bottom of the capsule. So it might actually pay to just move them a little bit down. Just like that. That shouldn't affect anything else. So I think that does it for the Vostok, at least as it stands right now. Oh yes, the other thing that I did, I don't know if I did this last time though, the bottom engine is still the same. That has not been changed. I just turned the gimbal off, because that's why we have the RCS system, to help us with our attitude control and all of that. So I think this one is basically ready to go for the Korabl-Sputnik. And if we look at history again, I can actually just go to the page. I've got it open here. So this was Korabl-Sputnik 1, and it was unmanned, and it was a precursor for the first human spaceflight. This we saw last time already. But the total number of Korabl-Sputniks were 5. As you can see, this was the last flight of the Vostok design prior to the manned flight. But I don't think we need to do 5 of them. we can just do one, and depending on how it goes, perhaps another one. But I think we're pretty close to an actual Kerbal launch now, and I'm really happy with how this craft turned out. Now, the release mechanism here, and this is maybe a good time to go back to the images. I know I flip back to them a lot, but I like to use them as a reference. So if we just look here again, that's a nice picture. So this shows the actual Vostok with its upper stage, basically. And as you can see, the upper stage fits very neatly into the largest extent of that cone-shaped structure. So it sits flush with that, and then obviously it would have the fairings and so on. But it also has these 4 vernier thrusters on the bottom again, like we had before with the upper stages. So that's just a very interesting note. And let's just have a look again. If I just search the Vostok rocket again, I just want to see where the fairings actually sit. So there basically we can see, obviously we have our normal R7 design, and then of course this hot stage kind of connection here that's open. Then the actual upper stage, and then the fairings on top of that. But there is a complication in terms of our version. And the real issue here is we are still using the 1.5 or 1.25 meter diameter parts for the rocket. If this was a 2 meter diameter, then it would have been different. Let's just have a look quickly. Any 2 meter part will do. Even though this is still a bit, you see, it's too big again. If we have a fairing, then it's going to still leave a large gap there. So the size is actually too big. So to get it to the closest, we still have to use the 1.25 meter parts. And also, I don't think it is necessary for us to build a huge giant 2 meter R7 that's got so much fuel and everything. It's not necessary for this payload. However, it is heavier than the Venera one. This is about 3.5 tons now, and I don't know if they include the weight of the Kerbal, but anyway. So I think this is really still within the sphere of the R7 the way that we had it, except the fact that the engines on that, the sparks, are a little bit too weak when it comes to lifting this kind of payload. So what I've done, as I said before, let's just actually put this together before I get sidetracked again. So this is just actually that fairing that we saw in that picture now. If I can fit it, because there's so many attachment points here. There. Had it just for a sec. Okay, there we go. So it's back to how it was. Now you can see this is again not wide enough. It's got the opposite problem from the 2 meter one, or 2.5 meter. It doesn't quite reach the outer edge of this structure here. But at least it covers the engine and it makes it all look nice. And I especially like how it fits inside those little antennas. It's just a little feature there that I really like. I just thought the stack decoupler, okay, it's on 100%, so let's leave it like that, because it has to basically clear the craft away from the rest of the upper stage. So I think that's fine, because we're not dealing with a very light payload anymore. But now the other issue comes in, and that is the one of having the fairing over this capsule, basically. Now we know that with the other version, the real version of course, the fairing was on the bottom here basically, and fitted very nicely over the capsule, within the rest of the upper stage not being covered. So let's just see what I came up with. Actually, we just have to put the whole thing back. There we go. So this is basically what it looks like now. We'll just look at the upper stage for now. So we've got 2 of these Airstream protective shells, and then of course another one in there. So essentially we've got a fairing inside a fairing inside a fairing. But again, it's so great that we can actually get away with that. And so this one basically covers the craft there, but I know the fairing is a bit big, you know, again with the real one it was very nice and flush with the upper stage, but here it's quite large, but it's okay, you know, it's the Kerbal version again. Now with the upper stage we're using the FLT 400, and again these 4 vernier jets, and they're again the spiders as well because they work so well. And as we saw with the image though, these ones are angled inward. Let's just have a look again. You see there, they are angled inwards a little bit, not by much, but a little bit. So I've recreated that here. In terms of the main engine, I'm using a thud, which I downrated to 50%. And the reason for that is just so I don't have to use the sparks the whole time. It's just something else, you know, it looks a bit different and I like how it looks. It did take a bit of trial and error to actually get it to be exactly in the middle, because this is another radial engine. And I think the way I did it was just to use 2 of them again and put them somehow in the middle, and just as long as they overlap there, I know they're exactly in the middle. And of course the thrust vector there will also show you if it's not exactly right, but it is important to get this one right, because if it's not right, this one, remember, doesn't have any gimbal, then it basically comes down to the spiders. If they're not able to offset the offset from the third engine, then the whole thing is going to start really deviating from the intended path. Then I created these structures here again with the struts. I know this one isn't so nice. I struggled a little bit because anytime you've got this adapter, it makes the placing of the struts a bit more difficult. But I think it looks decent. I'm happy with the way it looks. We can play around with it maybe, but I think we should really test it first. So then, of course, the decoupler is just inside there. I just moved it down. But so it looks nice again. It creates that sort of appearance that we see with the real thing. So let me just move this up now. So as for the rocket itself, this is the part where, like I said in the beginning, when we need to upgrade the R7 and move away from the sparks, these Rapier engines are actually ideal, as long as they're on the closed cycle, of course. So I just turned off the air breathing one, and it wouldn't work anyway because we don't have an air intake. But they look so ideal, you know, they've got the 4 nozzles, so they give the appearance of the R7 again. Then also the gimbals are all off, and we're still using the spiders on the outside of all the sections, so they still provide the gimbal. And of course the fins again, just for the show basically. Then I created the same kind of strut cross here, so that's exactly the same as before. And the only real other difference was because the Rapiers burn fuel a lot faster than the Sparks used to, I just added an extra tank to the top of the boosters, and then obviously another one on the core stage as well, so that the whole thing at least keeps the proportion more or less. However, then it becomes a bit difficult to create that appearance of an R7 because the section is now so long. It has to get offset quite a lot from the bottom here in order to still be able to angle without clipping in at the top. So I used these other decouplers, you know, the what are they called? The TT70 radials instead of the old TT38Ks. And they work perfectly well. There's no reason not to use them. I know we've got a bit of a gap in between here on the bottom now, but if we look further away during the launch, you'll see it looks a lot better. Otherwise it just looks like a normal set of strap-on boosters, you know, it doesn't create that kind of an angle. Anyway, then the issue was, of course, with the separation of the boosters. It still has to create that kind of Korolev cross, and of course that means the bottom has to really come up and the inside mustn't hit the core stage like we saw some of the times before. And the reason that happened was any time that you stage these boosters under about 35 kilometers, the air is still thick enough to exert a noticeable force on the side of this nose cone and on the side of the booster, which means that it doesn't get enough clearance upwards, you see? If the air pushes it down, then the nose gets crushed against the core stage there. So we have to stage this above 30 at least, but preferably above 35. Which also is again why we needed a bit more fuel, because it really does help. But our thrust to weight ratio is not ridiculous, it's a decent 1.63. So with all of that said, the rest is the same here again with the struts and so on. So this is our second R7 model, and this is really the Vostok R7. So let me actually save this in the sub-assembly while I'm thinking about it. So we've got the Lunar booster, the R7, and I didn't actually save the Molniya one that we used for the Venera. I can't remember if there was any change. I don't think so from the normal R7. I can just have a look. It's all still in the saves, and of course I share them on the Dropbox link as well. So actually let me copy. I just want that first. So this I'm just going to say Vostok R7, just so we know. There we go. I can just delete that now. And I think at some point we can probably also start saving the upper stages, but right now that really isn't necessary, because then I'm going to have to detach all of the struts and all of that. And really we want to see some action now. It's been a lot of talk and not a lot of action, so let's get into some action now. So from last time you might remember that we've got the probe core inside the Vostok capsule there. So this is going to be an unmanned mission. We'll pretend that we put some biological sample or something in there just to test again that the thing actually could support Kerbal life. We wouldn't want to send somebody like Jebediah up just to get killed. That would not work. So we just have to take him out of the capsule there. So now we're ready to go. I think the rest of it is good. We fire all of the main stages, then of course the stability enhancers, the clamps get detached as well, the boosters separate. Then actually by the time that we let's just see, is this right now? I don't actually think it is. This should go a little bit up. First then we separate that one, the interstage. Or is that? No, it was right, because after the booster separate, the core stage will still continue to burn, and that will get us high enough to remove the fairing. The only thing that I did here, again like last time we talked about this one, is this is not on a clamshell deploy, and I did turn the force very low, just so it falls out nicely. Otherwise it gets stuck in between those two fairing plates if it's on clamshell. So it still looks nice though. So this time I can just save this as the this is Korabl-Sputnik. And save, and let's see if this thing works. Actually, I'm glad I did a bit of that off camera, you know, just so we can get things moving along a little bit more. It's very clear, you know, that's why I try to just talk through everything, and of course you can have access to the craft files as well. So anyway, that'll do. And you see, I think that just looks nice. I know, again, obviously it isn't an exact representation of the Vostok and the rocket, but it's a Kerbal version, and I must say I'm very happy with it. So there we are. Let's launch this. I think this can just be a normal launch to the east and so on, and we'll try to land it back near here. Actually, I should install that trajectories mod so we can actually see better where we're going to land, but for now we can do without it. So I'll put some music on, and I think then I'll see you back on the ground perhaps. Yes, I think so. So enjoy. Actually, let me interject here. I think that went really well. Look at how that whole structure just comes off there. Beautiful, and it just slides out very gently. Excellent. Okay, it still does that thing as well, but we can just go past that. There we go. So there is the Vostok capsule. Just extend the antennas, of course, and put it on normal stability assist so it doesn't try to keep up with prograde. I think that went really well. I did notice, of course, that the rocket is a little bit sluggish because the tiny little spiders are the only gimbal force that we've got, because of course here is no wheel authority, so we have no access to any reaction wheels whatsoever, which is, I think, how it should be. For the most part, of course, we do want that option, but I think in terms of recreating this kind of thing, we want to keep it, you know, on the more difficult side, I would think. Now, I'm not sure. I think these top antennas are a little bit too long. If we just look at the scale of the ones on the bottom, these two ones sticking out the side look good, and these ones as well. We might have one or two on the bottom. I'll just have to check the images there again. But I think this just works wonderfully. And I mean, we just turn around very easily now. There's no more issue of struggling with it or not seeing the actual puffs of monopropellant. Everything works wonderfully, and there goes the upper stage. So let's go around a few times just to see what the thing looks like, and I think the proportions are just so beautiful and lovely. I think this is really my best design so far. I'm very happy with this. So anyway, I hope at least you've enjoyed watching me create it and so on, and that you'll at least try it if you're interested. So let's go around and just see what it does. We are of course using electric charge, so we just have to be a bit careful about that. Let's just see now where, if we want to return. I've never seen that before. I guess that's an icon for a relay satellite. Interesting. Usually it just looks like that. Oh well, so I guess somewhere about here I'm going to activate the retro engine. Or maybe a bit earlier, because this thing doesn't have a lot of fuel. As you can see, we have 50 seconds and 315 meters per delta V. So that's how I want it anyway. I don't want it to be overpowered as if this thing could go to the moon. And that's also why we have to be a bit sparing with the actual monopropellant. It's more about getting the craft into the right orientation for re-entry. So with that in mind, let's go home. This is going to be a short journey. Of course, I forgot to deploy the parachute before separating the probe core from this thing. So, yes, whatever's in here is not going to make it back home. Sorry. Also, the release from the rest of the craft still creates a bit of a spin, actually, as if it's not detaching very cleanly. But at least the center of mass here does mean that it corrects itself very quickly before it actually really starts heating up. So this is going to be pretty bad. Let's hope we don't hit something at the space center. Never seen this before, that it creates this long tail. That's interesting. Look at that. Take a picture of this. I like that. That looks so nice. And that is the probe, so it will somewhere re-enter and burn up. Very near to the mountains. Oh well, nothing I can do whatsoever. So I'll just speed it up and I'll see you back at the VAB. That was funny how it switched to the detached part there right at the end. It almost survived too. It's interesting. It didn't seem to have actually received any heating damage. But anyway, might be just because of the fairings and the radiators perhaps as well. Oh well.